Hi, this is Jason Banker from LumosConsulting, and welcome back to our video 4 of ACI Initial Build. Today we're going to be talking about policies and policy groups. Before we get started though into configuration, we do want to talk about best practices. When Lumos talks about best practices, we talk about them as a tried and true method that we've tested out in the field and we know it works. All of our employees try to stick to these best practices because, again, we do know they work. Doesn't mean it's the only practice, doesn't mean there aren't multiple ways to do certain things, but again, we're going to show things in this video. Doesn't mean it's the only way, but it's a way we recommend, with the motto of keeping it simple as possible. If you really look at what best practice means, it's a method or technique that's just consistently shown. It can become a standard way of doing things, and it's used as a benchmark. Again, just because it's done a certain way doesn't mean it's always the right way, doesn't mean it's the only way. So just try to build everything you're learning in these videos and make them meet the needs of your company, your organization, right? And tie these policies to yourself, but again, try to keep it as simple so it's manageable and operable as you move forward. Best practice doesn't mean the only practice. If you're defining your best practice, sit down with your whole infrastructure team, come up with standards. We talked about naming standards already. We're talked about leaf node naming. We've talked about multiple things when it comes to best practice, and we're just going to continue that. But again, just remember, it's not the only way to do things. So, moving forward, if we look at the access policy map, this shows the defining line between the logical model and the concrete model. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the concrete model. This is the physical hardware. This is what we're going to do to define the physical hardware and apply it to the logical model. If you're a multi-service provider, you'd carve this up in many ways per customer. If you're a single entity, again, keep it as simple as possible. With these interfaces, you can go ahead and make this very complex, and then it's very hard to manage later on. So some of the things we're going to show you is to keep it as simple as possible. Starting with domain. There are 4 domains: physical, VMM, L2, L3. We're going to be focusing on physical domain here. Physical domain, AEP, or what's going to tie the logical and the concrete model together, right? So I can have multiple domains. I could have one for prod, one for non-prod, one for dev, or I could just have one domain and limit what VLAN has access to what ports in other ways. So again, we'll be doing one single VLAN or physical domain in this demonstration. Right, moving on, Vlan pools, same thing. You can have a Vlan pool that contains all your VLANs. You can have a Vlan pool that's used for prod, non-prod, dev. We like to use 1 or 2 Vlan pools at the most, right? And then that gets all tied into an access entity profile. What an AEP is how I like to look at it, as a switch port trunk allow command. Is that the only term or the right term? No, but for us network guys, it does give you an idea of what VLANs we're tying to a port. Typically in an NXOS CLI, we would use a switch port trunk allow command to prune VLANs. I like to think of that's what this AEP is doing for me. Again, we do have to statically bind on a port, but the AEP does allow the specific VLANs. Next on the list is policies. Policies are a menu item, right? We go ahead and create link level, CDP, LLDP, port channel policies. These are just items we can select. It's just like going in a switch port interface and selecting switch port mode on or switch port mode trunk, all these different speed, duplex. We have this control, so we're going to create these settings and select them in what we call policy group. A policy group is what actually gets applied. It's a number of policies tied to a group that we tie to a port. These policy groups can be reuse from an access standpoint over and over and over again. From a port channel or VPC standpoint, it has to be unique. It basically replaces the port channel number we're used to. But again, this is what we're going to be focusing on. The next 3 on this is interface profiles, port selectors, and switch profiles. We'll be talking about that in the next video. So let's go ahead and jump right into our APIC. Here we are at the system dashboard. We'd want to go to Fabric Access Policies. You will be spending a majority of your time if you are a ACI administrator. All right, so first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and create our VLAN pool. Go ahead and create a simple VLAN pool. We'll call it Lumos VLAN pool. Our recommendation here is to leave the allocation mode dynamic. If we are integrating with VMM integration, it has to be dynamic. What we can do here is, this is the parent setting, right? If we come in and enter a range, so I'll get to that, but I'm going to go ahead and add VLAN 2, and we're going to make it static and hit OK. Because we made it static, it won't be used in a dynamic range unless this allocation child says dynamic. Our best practice is to also enter each VLAN one by one instead of a range. We typically do this by scripting just because it's quicker and more efficient. The reason for this, we don't want to have a large range and then want to remove a VLAN from that range and disrupt the range, right? So if we can use scripting and we can deploy 50 VLANs in single, that's what we like to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a couple VLANs here. If we know we're going to use VMM integration, we could go ahead and put a range of VLANs just for VMM integration, right? And we can make that dynamic. So as you see underneath, I have 3 statics that we have to statically assign, or we have a pool for VMM that's dynamic. So I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. Next thing we want to do is come into our domain. We're going to go ahead and create a Lumos prod domain. We don't see the need for multiple domains unless specifically necessary. What we're going to do here is we're going to tie our Vlan pool to it. So now we have a domain with the Vlan pool. We will get to the accessible entity profile next, so I'm not going to select a value there. We're going to hit submit. So now we have a physical domain. We have a Vlan pool created. I'm going to go ahead and create these, and the next is going to be the AEP. It is under policies, under global. We have our AEP. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. We're just going to call it Lumos AEP. Right, and we are going to tie our domain to this. Right, so we're going to tie our domain. Right, it's going to show what encapsulations we have. We're going to hit next. We can assign this to multiple ports. I don't recommend it. We also don't recommend using the wizard, because if you use the wizard, you don't know where to find it in the navigation window over here. If I go back to my domain just to show you, we can go to the domain and you will see now the AEP is tied to where we left it before. Okay, so now we have our domain, VLAN pool, and AEP assigned. Again, in a production environment, we'll typically have one AEP, one physical domain, and one VLAN pool. Right? Doesn't need to be more unless unless it's specifically necessary. So the next thing on our list is we're going to go to policies again, and we're going to go to interface. Right? We're going to configure some menu items. I'm going to create a couple link level policies. We're going to call one called auto. We're going to have auto negotiation on, speed inherit, and hit submit. So you can see it does match the default. I don't like to remember what the default is. I could delete this if I wanted to, or I could leave it, but I'd rather look at the name and know what it is rather than trying to figure out what default is. I'm going to come in the CDP interface. We're going to do CDP on. You can do CDP on or enable. We're going to do the same thing for LLDP. Now we have LLDP on or off. We have CDP on or off. We're going to want to configure a port channel. So let's do LACP active. I will need to change the mode. We will create a static on. This is for normal ether channel. And for us UCS users, I'm going to go ahead and create a MAC pinning. Great, so now we have some menu items selected. The next on our list will be our interface policy groups. So with interface policy groups, there's a couple rules here. So we have leaf access port, PC, port channel, and VPC. We typically use these top 3. An access port, I really don't love the way it's named. It can be more than an access port, but it's a single home device, right? So there's a couple things you can do here. There's a fine line of using, well, since the leaf access port can be reused, there's a fine line to creating a policy and having 1,000 servers use it, because if 1,000 servers use it and I make a change, it affects 1,000 servers, right? There's also, you could also do too many. If you do one per host, right, you're gonna have this huge list and it kind of comes not manageable, right? So I try to literally break it up to where if you're using PDUs in your environment, maybe you have a PDU policy group. If you have a NTP servers, use an NTP server group. But for this example, we're just going to create one that says access port, right? Again, single homed. I'm going to grab a link level policy of auto. I'm going to grab my LLDP on. I'm going to turn CDP on. I am going to go ahead and select my AEP. Now, without this AEP, you're never going to traverse VLANs across this link, so this is extremely important. It's one of the first places I look when I'm troubleshooting. Did the AEP get assigned to the policy group? So I can go ahead and hit submit. We're going to go ahead and create one that's called trunk. Right, so if any trunk ports that are single homed can go ahead and use this policy. We can do auto. We're going to select the AEP. I will show you here, usually I create more than one link level policy. If I want to create another one, I don't have to bounce back to the other screen. I can just go create link level policy. I'm going to create one that says 10 GB. I'll turn auto negotiation off. I will grab a speed of 10 gig, right, and hit submit, and now I have a different link level policy, right? But I'm going to go ahead and go back to auto. So we're going to go ahead and submit. Right, so now I have 2 access ports. If we're doing VPC, you do have to be unique, so you can only use one VPC policy group per user device. Think about it as a port channel. If I'm using port channel 100, port channel 100 is only going to go to one device. It's not going to go to multiple devices. I'm not going to reuse the same port channel. Think about it that way. In ACI, we do not select port channel numbers. So what we do is create names. So I'm going to say VPC.test host. I'm going to go ahead and create a link level policy. We're going to use 10 gig here. Why not? CDP on and off. LLDP on. We are going to select our AEP. And now since it's a VPC link, we also want to select our port channel policy. Typically I use LECP active. That's what we're going to select. I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. So again, if I have multiple VPCs, which is going to go to dual devices, I'm going to go ahead and create a VPC. If it's going to be a port channel that's going to the same leaf switch, I will create a port channel policy that is also unique. So again, leaf access ports can be reused. This might be too minimal. Again, if I have a bunch of hosts using this trunk port, I make a change, it affects it. So logically, break up your environment. I wouldn't create one per host. Right, I would logically, hey, let's make one for all our ED servers, let's make one for all our SQL servers, so on and so forth. Right, but again, this takes some sit down and some planning. So now we have some policy groups, we have some policies. This leaves us to move forward and do our switch ports, our switch configurations, as well as our VPC. That's going to be in the next video. Thanks for joining. Please leave any questions or comments down below.